Greetings, this is Ron.
Then this is Fellonius, and we are back with Chapping episode 2.
This is the show in which two chaps from different countries come together. We each bring a random mystery topic to share and see what the other person's point of view is.
And hopefully it's interesting enough for you guys to listen to.
Well, I'm going to take the opportunity to start my topic with a question.
Oh dear.
Have you ever owned any slaves?
No, I have never owned any slaves, and I would rather be a slave than owning one.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Hmm?
Well, this may sound like an odd topic, but when I was like in elementary school or middle school, I don't even know, learning about the Civil War in the U.S.,
Yeah.
I somehow did not learn enough of the reasons that we had slaves and why our southern states had slaves and our northern states were against slavery. I never thought to question it thoroughly.
No,
until
you're against it, of course.
Oh yeah, sure.
We just have to clarify that.
Yes, good,
So,
thank you. But my son is in 8th grade, and he is learning about the New England colonies, and he has a study guide for a test. And I decided I would read through it and then ask him some questions and help him study a little bit. And I learned some stuff that now probably people listening to this are like, duh, we knew that. But I didn't know it. And I really learned something that made complete sense to me that I just never even thought of before. So I thought I would just...
Yeah. That sounds really interesting, because me, being a Swede, of course, don't have the same history books that you have. And I have just learned a lot about slavery and the Civil War, well, as a grown-up. So perhaps we can...
And you watch movies and you never understand why we had slaves, other than the very basic greed, obvious, racism, that kind of stuff, right? So... Moreover, this is probably a commentary on why the North didn't have slaves. And let me see if I can just sum this up here. And then I was wondering if you were going to tell me, well, duh, I already knew this. But okay, so when the first colonists came over to our East Coast, they landed and they formed these 13 colonies. Now, by the way, I might get a fact wrong. Leave us a comment and let us know.
And it was British and French and all that stuff. And
So at some point, there was 13 colonies, roughly speaking, and they were very much segregated into the New England colonies, which were in the north.
Yes.
The middle colonies, which were things like New York, and then the southern colonies, which was like Georgia, North Carolina, etc. Now... The interesting thing to me that I learned is that we'll start in the South. So the southern colonies, I'll give you my summary. The geography of the United States actually had a lot to do with slavery and the Civil War. If the geography of the U.S. had all been the same, we would either still have slaves or not. Yeah. But I never knew about this. So the southern states obviously were hot. There was a lot of good land for growing cotton and things like that. And so those colonies grew these plantations where they had the traditional slaves as we come to think of them. Now, the middle colonies, there was farmland, but it wasn't as rich as the South. And these were generally like the main points of where people would enter the United States in New York, etc.
Yes.
And so a lot these grew into the big cities and into the boat, the shipyards and things like that, dock workers. And the people who settled there were much more open thinking in their religions. There was much more of a melting pot. So there were not the kind of farm slaves in the South, but there were more like dock worker slaves.
Yes.
And in the northern states, it was colder and the ground was much rockier, so they really didn't have a lot of farms.
Nope.
And in the north, they turned to farming the sea and took all their timber and made boats. So the people that were slaves were more on boats and not in farms.
Yes.
So there were actually slaves in all three regions.
Oh, yes.
But the ones where the slaves were actually like the mass quantities of workers were in the South, where they had the plantations, and the ones in the North really didn't need slaves as much. They had more of like servants and then people that worked on boats. And the ones in the middle colonies, they had dock workers who basically ended up being able to buy their own freedom.
Yes.
And so basically slavery in the North and in the middle colonies just kind of dissolved because of the climate and the land.
This just faded away.
And then, of course, the people in those states were more open thinking and came to treat the slaves or the
Yeah, but you can also see it as there was still coming people from Europe.
Yeah.
And they came to New York, of course, and through those northern states. And that made that melting pot was growing, and the different types of thinking was more open-like.
Exactly.
They came for freedom. They didn't came for slavery. They came to be free. Down in the South, I don't think people were adding too many white people to the southern states, because they were more or less coming from northern states, I suspect. I suspect so. Or should we say colonies? Sorry, colonies.
Yeah. So it was just interesting as I was reading through it that if the climate had been more like the South all through the U.S., then we probably would still have slavery till today. Or if the climate would have been like Sweden, like hard, rocky soil.
Like Canada.
Yeah, no reason to have those slaves. Then we might not have ever had as much slavery as we did, or a need for a civil war. So it's just interesting that the geography and just the nature of, the why does New York have the big cities, and why does the North, why do those three regions have the differences that they do? I just found it pretty fascinating.
And still, we are talking 1700s here. We are not talking around Civil Wars. That Civil War was 1862 to 64, 65, 66, something like that.
Yeah, and by that point, I mean those three sort of. Well, I'll say that
they have grown.
Yeah, the North and the South kind of spread west across the U.S. Of course, the middle colonies that I talked about sort of stayed there in the middle of the East Coast. Never like that big of city and port didn't really
and
couldn't exist away from the shore.
1777 where you threw out the British, and that Civil War was ended.
The Revolutionary War.
Yes, the Revolutionary War. Thank you. So in those days, 1777, there was no talk about being bad to have slaves.
No. Well, it was. I think it was. It was different in terms of the visibility. Like in the early days, everybody was just getting their own stuff settled and exploring and all that stuff. It wasn't until like the country was broad enough that we really realized it was an issue. But yeah, it's just fascinating. I never before considered the angle of these. Why was it not in the North as much, and why was it in the South, and how did it all start? So
yes, and it was just a solution to the problems that the environment gave you. Because back in Europe, we didn't have slaves. We had poor people that worked as slaves. Of course, they didn't get much pay and couldn't buy their own freedom. but they were just because they were poor and nothing else. And that was something that we have had since the 1500s.
Yeah.
In your case, it was the environment, the hot climate down there perhaps they needed African slaves. Perhaps they were the only one who could stand the heat.
Yeah, that I'm not sure.
I wouldn't. I can tell you that. I would be useless as a slave back in the 1800s.
Yeah, I think I would be useless as a slave even today. But I don't know. I just thought I would share that perspective.
Yeah, that's interesting. Very interesting. Oh, did we have just 10 minutes? Oh,
yes,
dear.
Yes,
that went fast.
Yeah,
we are having a bell telling us that we should stop talking about one topic and change to another one. Now, this was a very interesting historical aspect that I couldn't think of. I have never thought about that, and I haven't read about it. I more pointed out that Abe Lincoln was the slave guy.
Yeah.
Anti-slave guy, I should say. So... okay, that turns it over to me then. Now let's go to a philosophical question. It is not a big one, but still, it fits. You have heard about Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, right, Ron?
Oh, yep, I've read it.
You have read it? You know about it? You have seen the movies?
Yep.
And you have seen the TV show?
I don't think so, and I don't know if I've seen the whole movie, actually.
Okay, never mind. It's no big deal. But I was thinking about Hitchhiker's Guide. Now, that's a concept, okay. I would say. Let's say, why doesn't Hitchhiker's Guide exist in real life?
So
think about it. Hitchhiker's Guide.
So you mean a book that tells you how to hitchhike across a country?
No, giving you small bits and pieces about the pieces. I mean, Hitchhiker's Guide to Illinois. I mean, it doesn't have to be every detail a tourist guide, but a hitchhiker's guide. Now, that's the big difference. A hitchhiker's guide just gives you enough information to get you along to the next stop.
It's actually sort of an interesting idea to me, and the first thing that two things jump to my mind. One is that it's very dangerous. Hitchhiking in this modern day and age is not a good idea.
Yeah.
So
we are not doing it much in Sweden either, I can tell you that. And I'm not picking up anyone. Even if it's a nice looking lady, I'm not picking them up because her brothers are laying down in the ditch trying to get me in my car.
Exactly. No. Well, that, and I think the second thing I was thinking about is, this past summer, I spent a lot of time driving around my area and finding places that I didn't know existed before, like little train depot, little museum, first farm in the area, blah, 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 due to Pokemon Go.
You can go to your local tourist bureau and find all those stuff. Let's say you have a hitchhiker's guide to this globe that gives you small hints. If you suddenly end up in Paris, France, you suddenly need to know, how do I get to the cheapest hotel or whatever? Because you're a hitchhiker, man. You're carrying everything, not big trunks and stuff. You're not taking a cab to the next hotel. You're trying to get somewhere to live for the night. Now, of course, I say to you, you said it before, hitchhiking is dangerous. But still, Hitchhiker's Guide as a concept could work.
I think it's a clever name for a sort of like a touristy book, but it would be geared towards somebody who is on. I hesitate to say on foot because see here, things are so spread out that. I guess, but like let's say somebody in the U.S. was going to take a road trip from, the famous Route 66 or from their town to the West Coast or something. This would be like interesting things to see along the way, but also little tips for like how to get like where is it safe to sleep at night?
Exactly.
Or where can you get handouts of food or something like that? I don't know.
Exactly. And since we are modern people, we have our cell phones. In our cell phones, we have apps. So Hitchhiker's Guide could be an app That means that you just download the area that you need. You don't go around with the whole complete globe inside.
Yeah, it certainly could be an app where there's a series of like Hitchhiker's Guide to X, and X is like your state.
Yeah.
And it's like cheap things to do, and it's arranged not by topic, but just as if you were going from east to west or north to south or something like that. And the things that it talks about are geographically placed.
Yes.
It's a cool name. It's certainly a cool name for an app.
Yeah, it would be if it works perfectly fine, because I would love to have it like a Wikipedia. There are people out there just giving tips. Now, the historical thing about this is, of course, that I'm not totally sure that you know about the traveler people, or the gypsies, as they were called somewhere along the way. Yeah. They had a marking system. That if they came to a big farm or something and they were just driven away by shotgun and stuff, they would go back and mark that spot with an X or whatever. I'm not totally familiar with those things. That means that the next traveler that came along saw the X. This is a place we should avoid. Let's just go hike over to the next one. Now, there was, of course, the other stuff as well. If you met generous people, you could just make a big, I don't know what kind of circle or something. And then the next traveler people that came along saw the circle. They will knock on the door just asking for perhaps a favor, perhaps making a day's work or something for a day's food. Now, they were traveler people because they couldn't. They had it in there. They had no roots. They have nowhere to stay. They just moved and moved and moved. And they could go one by one, but they could also go by families. And that's something that we are not talking about here. Hitchhiker's Guide is just located to one, maybe 2 or 3 people. So that is historical correct. Now, if that was in the States, I'm not totally sure, but that's how it worked in Sweden, in Europe, all over the place. Now, today I wouldn't go on hitchhiking, but we also had something. We hiked with the train. It was very cheap to go by train during the 60s and 70s here. Now, your trains are not the same as ours, but we could go very cheap by train, and just when we just dropped off in the city or something, we was just standing there. I didn't do this. I'm sorry, I didn't do it. I had no idea. And you could just stand there watching where to go next. And they would have been loving to have an app telling them, oh yes, that little hotel down by the river, the Grand Royal, it's cheap. It's cheaper than anything else, but you have to mind the rats.
Yeah.
I mean that's the sort of things that you could get in a Hitchhiker's Guide. There are bad things, but there's good things, and it's cheap.
I would imagine that there's something like a backpacker's guide to Italy or something like that, which is probably the closest modern day. Who knows? I'm going to Google it. There may be a Hitchhiker's Guide, but it's a. I guess if you think about the book and the movie, well, the book, right? That's really the Bible. There are strange and goofy practices and jokes in there, like, so it would have to have like weird stuff in it, right?
Yes, if you come to Australia, never mind the kangaroos, watch out for the koalas. I mean, it could be anything like that.
Yeah, or like it would tell you to always bring a towel with you. And,
of course. You always do that. Ever since I've read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I'm always packing my towel first. So, it has been just a thing, but it's a fun thing.
When I was in middle school, there was this guy in one of my classes that used to write these complete nonsense short stories about just whatever random things came into his head,
We should invite him.
Kind of goofy stuff. And one of his big inspirations was Hitchhiker's Guide.
No kidding.
And I really enjoyed writing those stories because it was like one of my first just creative improv sort of activities that I ever did. But I had no idea what Hitchhiker's Guide was. I only read the book probably 5 or 6 years ago, something like that.
Oh, okay.
And I don't even remember why I read the book, to be honest with you.
No, well, I know because someone just gave me a tip. You should read that one as well.
Yeah.
And since then, I have been rereading it like 5 or 6 times. It really is a Bible to me because it is all those strange things that you might actually get. Even the restaurant at the end of universe. I mean, just that's a prospect as well. Well, nevertheless, as I said, we're not going to tell everyone to go out hitchhiking, but it would be fun to have something like it.
Yeah. Maybe some people's YouTube vlogs of crisscrossing their state or their country, or something like that.
Well, that might, as you said, that might actually be one. You never know.
You never know.
Oh, there goes the bell. Well, that was fun.
Yeah, interesting chat. If you guys listening have some ideas of random topics you want to hear about, either our experiences or just try to catch us off guard, let us know in the comments.
Yes, please do. Bye.
Bye.